Casual Tom's kind of salty.
Okay. Good afternoon. On behalf of State Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister and the Office of Federal Programs, welcome to our 2020-2021 Home Language Survey and Bilingual EL Identification webinar. Before we get started, I'm just going to say that the Home Language Survey has not changed for fiscal year 21. So this will be a review for a lot of people. And if you're new to your job, then it's probably all new. But yeah, it's the same information as before. So to start off with, there's some requirements regarding identification, and for some reason it's not changing slide. There we go. All districts are required to identify English learners in a timely and reliable manner. And this identification process begins with the Home Language Survey, which you often see referred to as HLS. And the HLS assists in fulfilling federal requirement under ESSA to identify potential English learners. So in Oklahoma, the general rule concerning the Home Language Survey are that a survey completed in the 2016-2017 school year, that's when we went to the current format, more or less. So a survey done in that year or later can follow a student as long as that student remains in the district where the survey was completed. I know a lot of districts do a new home language survey every year with enrollment. That's okay too, but if you want to just keep the same one with the student as long as they're in the district, that's okay. You are required, on the other hand, to complete a new survey if the students move to a new district or if they return to a district after an absence of more than a year. So once you've done the home language survey, and I think most schools and districts do this with enrollment in the enrollment packet at the beginning of the year. Once you have a completed survey, they're to be stored in the student's cumulative folder or be accessible in digital format. So if storage space is a problem, you can scan them and keep them, but you have to have one on file that has to be accessible for every student. Then the way we use the home language survey is the first step in identifying English learners. It's also the tool that's used for identifying students who will be classified as bilingual. We'll get to that in a second. The home language survey on its own does not determine EL status, but what it does is it indicates which students are then to be screened with a WIDA assessment, with one of the WIDA screener tests. And it's only the WIDA assessment that is used to determine EL status. You can find a copy of the Home Language Survey in both English and in Spanish on the Title 3A page of the State Department of Education website. And we have here the web address, that's sde.ok.gov/title-Roman numeral 3. Okay, regarding bilingual status here for your state funding, bilingual funding. I want to say something real quick like about that this confused me for quite a while, so I think it's worth pointing out. The way the word bilingual is used is the way the state legislature has defined bilingual, which is not necessarily the way most people use the word bilingual. It's a status. It does not simply mean that the student speaks two languages. It's more that the student speaks a language other than English. Anyhow, the home language survey is what's used to determine bilingual funding. So the responses given on the home language survey determine that and flag students for EL screening. And there is a document, it's the 2019-2020 Bilingual Count Verification Packet. That's, I know it says 2019-2020, but that's the most recent version, and that's the one that's valid, currently valid. And it outlines the general rules concerning basic identification, and that too is available on our website, the sde.ok.gov on the Title III page, and that's downloadable. And there's a table at the back of that also for the wave coding, how different categories of students should be coded when you enter them in the wave. So again, I'm going to recapitulate. All EL students are considered bilingual, but not all bilingual students are necessarily EL. So, and we'll, in just a minute, get to the distinctions, how that's determined. First, let's have a look at the form itself. And again, you can download this form from our website. It's not terribly clear. Here I just copied and pasted it into the PowerPoint. It's not all that clear, so I have to put my glasses on to read the questions. You'll see at the very top, there's just general student information and demographic information, and then there's a series of questions, 1 through 6. The first 3 of those are about the languages spoken by the student. So the first one is, what's the dominant language most often spoken by the student? The second, what is the language routinely spoken in the home? And the third, what language was first learned by the student? And then it asks whether the parents need interpretation or translating services, and if so, from which language. And then the last question asks the date that the student was first enrolled in his school in the United States. And that's, again, regards Title III funding, is why that question is there. Anyway, so this is what the home language survey looks like. When the student completes, or when the parents or student complete it, then we look at the responses to those first 3 questions about languages. And if 2 or more of the answers to those 3 questions are any language other than English, then the student is considered, quote, more often, and automatically qualifies for bilingual aid. So again here, bilingual means the student speaks a language other than English. So, 2 answers that are other than English, the student qualifies for bilingual aid. If a language other than English is indicated only once on the 3 language responses, the student is considered less often and qualifies for bilingual aid if they also meet one of these criteria. So if you have just one language that's other than English and the student scores below proficiency on the WIDA screener test, in this case, the student is considered bilingual and also EL. We'll get into that in a minute. If one of the responses is something other than English and the student has a score of basic or below basic on the previous year's state testing ELA test, then they're considered bilingual. And then the third case, if it's one answer other than English and the student scored at or below the 35th percentile composite reading score from the spring of the previous year on a state-approved norm reference test. And in Oklahoma, that's there are just 2 of those, the RSA K3 approved assessments or Driven to Read approved assessments. Okay, so that's for establishing bilingual status. I need to go back, excuse me. For establishing EL status, if you have, if any of the questions have a response other than English, then the student should be given a WIDA screener test. And if they score below proficient, so it's below a 4.8 on that screener test, then they are classified as EL. And you're required then to provide EL services, you're required to drop an ELAP, and so on. Okay, all of this needs to take place within 30 days of enrollment if you're doing it at the beginning of the school year. So you have a home language survey, and if students are to be screened, they have to be screened within 30 days. If the student arrives later in the year, then they should be screened within 15 days of enrollment. So that's, when we say they have to be screened in a timely manner, that's usually 30 days at the beginning of the year or 15 days during the school year. So let's go then to some common causes of confusion. Hyphenation. So if, when they're filling out the home language survey, parents put two languages and with a hyphen, like, what does the student normally speak? Well, they speak English, Spanish. That's a cause of confusion. In these cases, the district can default to the language other than English for the purpose of bilingual funding. So if you have somebody who puts English, Spanish, go ahead and count them as bilingual. You get the extra bilingual funding. You can default to English with appropriate test data. So if you have test data backing this up, for the purposes of exempting a student from EL screening. So if you have a student who arrives who actually is bilingual, they're obviously proficient in English and another language, and you can back that up with test data from previous years, then you don't have to screen that student as an EL because they're doing fine. Hyphenation is allowed, so to speak, but districts should make every reasonable effort to ensure that parents and guardians understand the 3 home language survey questions and that they answer with a single response for each. And clearly, you can't control everything that parents are going to do, but you need to make an effort to make sure they understand what the questions are about. Okay. Some other issues. Parents and guardians provide questionable responses. So for reasons beyond our control, parents might feel the need to provide responses on the home language survey that do not accurately reflect true linguistic status of the student. And I've gotten several phone calls about this, where students will, who are obviously not proficient in English, have a home language survey that says English, English, English. In situations where the home language survey has changed for a current EL student, the new home language survey has no effect on a previous classification of EL. Just make a note of the issue, attach the new home language survey to earlier ones, and ignore it. Okay, because once a student has been identified as an English learner, the only way out of that classification is to test proficient on the WIDA access test. So changing the home language survey does not change the status once the student has been identified. Okay, this also applies to students arriving from another district with conflicting status and home language survey responses. Just make a note, put the home language survey in the cumulative folder. I got an email just yesterday about this. A student arrived in a new district, put English, English, English on their home language survey, but they noticed in the wave that the student was classified as EL in the previous district. In the previous district, the home language survey had languages other than English. Okay, that student was and remains an English learner, must be served as an English learner, and will exit that status only once they've tested proficient on the WIDA access test. So again, I'm going to repeat, because this is important, responses on the home language survey do not directly affect EL status, but only a WIDA assessment can classify a student as EL. I would add, once a student is classified as EL, only a result of proficient on the WIDA access exam will get them out of that classification. Okay, again, just along the same lines, when parents students formerly classified as English learners submit a new home language survey, changing all responses or 2 of the responses to English. Okay, we mentioned that the results of that on EL status, which is null. This will change their bilingual status because the bilingual status is determined by the home language survey. So if a parent changes, fills out a new home language survey, they change all the answers to English, then you don't get the state bilingual funding for that child anymore. So in these cases, really the only thing you can do is make an effort to contact the parents and make sure that the home language survey truly represents the student status. And that about wraps up all the information. I'm sure there'll be questions because we can't cover like all the eventualities. If you have any questions, we have a chat box open. You can send in questions. You can also call me at 405-521-4878. You can reach me by email at thomas.kirk@sde.ok.gov. And while we're here, I'm going to put up a couple more phone numbers. This is available on our website where there's a handy chart of who do I call with questions about English learners, broken down by which offices do what. So questions about the ELPA indicator for the school report cards, go to the Office of Accountability. Their number is 405-522-5169. All Title III questions or questions about home language survey and ELAP come to me in federal programs, and I have the general federal programs number here. It's 405-521-2846. And then in the Office of Assessment deals with assessment, obviously, the WIDA screener and access tests, and their number is 405-521-3341.
I know you've got at least one question out here.
I'm going to pull up that.
Good.
Okay, got a chat question. Oh, over here. Will you post this PowerPoint? Yes, we're recording the webinar, and it should be posted soon. There's usually a lag of 2 or 3 days before it shows up on the website, but it will be up there within the week. Anything else?
That was your hardest question.
That was a tough one, yeah. Okay, I think I will sign off now. We've got another webinar in about 10 minutes about the school-wide and targeted assistance plans, and I will make room for that.